I always say people don't just read words, they need to unpack meaning from those words that you show them. They don't they don't buy a product, they make a buying decision. So each section that we display in our wireframes, we consider it as kind of like a group of micro decisions. So it's not only about the primary calls to action that you have on the website, like your main buttons, book a call, book a demo. It's about all the micro decisions and micro steps that they need to take.
Welcome back everyone to another episode of the Growth Hub podcast, the podcast for all things B2B SaaS marketing, brought to you by marketing agency Advanced B2B. I'm your host Clément René, and today we'll talk about something all B2B companies need to get right to meet the conditions for sustainable growth, and that's messaging. Messaging is crucial because it helps define your brand. At the core, it highlights what differentiates you from your competitors. It communicates the value you create for your target audience, and I'm aware of how AI generated this is about to sound, but in this day and age where too many B2B companies are starting to sound the same, strong messaging is what will help your customers and prospective customers to understand your positioning, understand what makes you unique and maybe trustworthy. In this episode of the Growth Hub podcast, I'm joined by Chris Silvestri, founder of Conversion Alchemy, and Chris actually goes by the Conversion Alchemist. He's been exploring the intricacies of messaging and how to balance customer research, user experience, and even psychology to help brands craft messages that resonate with their audience. And in this episode, we cover why too many companies need help with messaging, the importance of empathizing with customers, the unique framework Chris actually uses to understand an audience better, how to use AI in your messaging work, how often you should actually revisit your messaging, and a bunch of other things you'll want to hear and bring home with you. And so here we go for episode 109 of the Growth Hub podcast with Chris Silvestri, founder of Conversion Alchemy. Hey Chris, and welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So I briefly introduced you just now, but can you maybe tell us a bit more about yourself? So who is the Conversion Alchemist?
Yes, so my name is Chris, originally from Italy. I now live in the UK, but I'm the founder and chief conversion copywriter at Conversion Alchemy, where we help B2B SaaS companies find their message market fit and convert more prospects into buyers on their website through a combination of UX, copywriting, messaging strategy, and deep understanding of buyers' psychology.
All right, we'll talk a bit more about this in a moment, but this one might be a little bit silly, but what is it about messaging that makes you get out of bed in the morning, and why do you think so many companies actually need help with that?
Yeah, so from the moment, so my background, I used to be in a totally different field. I used to be a software engineer in industrial automation. So imagine basically those computer programmers programming automatic assembly machines that ended up in factories. So completely another sector. I used to play drums, still play drums every once in a while, but I had a band. We wanted to tour more, so I decided why not look online for how to make money online. And then I stumbled on copywriting, messaging, and I was instantly hooked by the psychology behind it, the deeper understanding of decision making, the human behavior that you need to have in order to have people do stuff just by reading your words. So I was instantly hooked, and I started studying that. And back in 2018, I went full time into copywriting and messaging. And I think a lot of companies, their biggest problem is that they have this curse of knowledge. So they think about what they do, about their product, mostly from an internal perspective, their internal view. And that means that they also struggle to communicate that because they say it probably in a way that doesn't really resonate with their audience, which comes from a totally different level and playing field. So you need to kind of bridge that gap.
Okay, so it's like maybe companies talking too much about themselves and not enough about the problems that they're actually trying to solve. Yeah,
and mostly about features without including like the value, the benefits, even though most of them know that, but still it's hard to put it into practice.
Mm-hmm. A couple of episodes ago in the show, we were talking about this, is like putting the what before the why,
Yeah.
and that's why this is entirely wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Even though there's a nuanced point I think to make there, which is, yes, you need to explain why you do it and what's the value, what's in it for customers. But the point of strategy, I think, strategy that goes then with copy, it's that you also need to be clear on what you do exactly, how you do it, and who you do it for, and then bridge the gap into how you say that. So I think the what still has a place, but yeah, you need to connect those two well.
You just did now anyways, but like you often emphasize the importance of also like empathizing with your customers and, you know, to try to understand how and why they buy, as we just said now. But do you have specific frameworks or a framework that you follow to gain those like deeper customer insights?
Yeah, we probably need to take a little step back. So as I mentioned, all the companies, they might know that they need to speak in terms of benefits rather than features, but a lot of them, when they say that, they mean that, according to them, they just need to simply say what they do to people, to basically throw it on their face, on their website. But that's not really how it works, because going back to empathy, when you try to talk simply to an audience, you basically remove the complexity entirely, especially in B2B. But it's important to be clear, and clarity makes that complexity understandable, which goes back to empathy. You need to make them understand what you're saying, and it's different from different audiences, have a different level of understanding, different level of empathy that you need to reach. So in order to understand them, you have to imagine them already having a kind of a conversation happening in their heads when they land on your website, and that's what most companies, I think, they do wrong in their copy. They try to say, okay, this is what we do. But the first thing that you need to see on a website, if you're a B2B buyer, decision maker, you need to see that they are talking about exactly the conversation that you're having inside your head. And once that matches, then it's like, wow, like they are speaking exactly to my pain point, to my desired outcome that I want to achieve. And when you do that, there's something that clicks inside. So our job as messaging strategists, copywriters, and the framework that I use, it's kind of a system that I've developed that helps me understand the different layers. I see it's kind of like a pyramid. So at the top you have kind of the surface layer, which goes down to what people say, what people say. So it's basically understanding what words they use, and you can get those from reviews online, so other companies' websites. But then after that, there's also the experience layer. I call it the structural layer. And that's all about understanding what they do on the website. So looking at, for example, user interaction data, seeing how they move through the website, how they consume your messaging and copy. And then there's the deeper layer, which is more about understanding why they act. And that goes back to understanding exactly their decision-making process, especially if you are working in B2B, there's the whole decision-making unit made of different decision makers. So yeah, inside each of these layers, then we divide again into internal research, external research, and market research. And each of those areas, we use different methodologies to try to understand as much as possible of the whole context, of the whole picture, so that we have an accurate representation of what people are thinking when they land on our website.
Could you maybe like walk us through like an example of how that would actually, how you would actually use that in practice? Yeah,
sure. So let's say that I start working with a B2B company. I can make an example of a recent one that we work with. Was a company in the data integration and quality space, so quite complex. Business buyers were mostly business leaders, or could be, I don't know, the CMO or CFO, anyone in the business who uses data. And then they also had the technical buyers, which could be CTOs or IT managers. So we need to understand both those types of buyers. So the first things that you could do if you're a company and you've never ran any research easiest thing that you can do, for example, is to go to that surface layer. What reviews can you find online on sites like G2 Crowd or Capterra, or even on Amazon? Sometimes some books on Amazon that speak to that industry market can have some good language. What is some of the language that you can capture to understand how they speak, what language they use, what do they know as well about your market and product, if they know competitors. Then you can also look at competitors' website. What messaging are they using, which might necessarily doesn't need to mean that it's right, but it's good to have that context as an example. Another thing, so a lot of companies might capture support chats. So those are typically available, or sales recordings, conversations. Those are always available but never used. So a good thing you can do without wasting time on actually embarking on a whole research project. Use the stuff that you have already and dive into it and try to understand how these people speak and kind of who they are at the surface. Then you can dive in the kind of experience layer, which means looking at things like heat maps, user interaction data. So in this case, I typically use Hotjar or other similar platforms where you can look at heat maps and understand, okay, how's our traffic using our website? How far down the page they scroll? Where do they click? What are the pieces of copy that they spend the most time on, that they focus on? Which means what areas are working, what areas are not working. So all of that is important data that we can use as context. Then once you have that, then we jump into the final deep layer, which is kind of the most expensive in terms of the type of research, which is qualitative research, or interviewing customers, running surveys, qualitative surveys typically. And typically understand through those conversations not only what they like about our product, not only asking random quantitative data just to understand how they use the product, but mostly to understand the decision-making process. So understanding what solutions or alternatives they used in the past, what they were considering before choosing you, why they went forward with you, what were their expectations or the decision-making process. So all of that, it's super important to understand, to basically create a more comprehensive picture of who they are and how they make decisions. So we basically did exactly that with the data integration company, especially because they are in a super crowded space. Data integration, there's lots of platforms, cloud now. So we basically narrowed down to a very specific problem because we realized that the customers who valued their product the most didn't want like a complete architecture revamp, replacing huge enterprise resources. They just wanted a simple tool that plugged into their data, existing data, without revolutionizing everything, and only solved one specific business problem that they had, like, for example, duplicate customer records for their marketing team to run better campaigns. So we emphasized that on the page, like get your data projects done faster, more efficiently. That was kind of the main angle that we took. And that all came through understanding those different layers of who the customers are.
I also have a question, like taking a little step back, because earlier you mentioned also like looking at reviews, for instance, on G2 Crowd and stuff like that. And I just wanted to ask you, like, how do you, like, how much value do you attribute to the positive reviews and also to the negative ones? And I'm also asking because recently, like, that it's not something I necessarily like thought about before, but like I saw this comment pass on LinkedIn when someone was saying that, you know, platforms like J2 usually put forward like very positive reviews. It's very like it's difficult to find like negative stuff on those. So yes, I just wanted to pick your brain on like how would you fare positive and negative reviews, and also where do you source negative reviews?
Yeah, so actually, like a lot of the negative data, negative perception that you can have, we usually get it from customer interviews. So that's also where we ask, okay, like how are you seeing the product that you're using now, our client's product, and how are you seeing other ones. So for example, a good question to ask there, it's like, if you didn't have this product, what would you be doing, which also opens up information on alternatives that are not maybe competitors or like direct competitors. For reviews, yes, so those platforms sometimes are a bit biased, but that's also why I think it's important to look at all the spectrum of all competitors, because if you look at only one competitor, one product, obviously it's going to be positively compared to that one. But if you look at all of them, you will soon start seeing patterns of people mentioning other platforms, and you'll see, okay, these guys, they know about these other 2-3 competitors, they often mention them along with these negative traits and negative aspects because they've tried it. And that also tells you, okay, this is the awareness that they have about who other competitors are in the space and what they are doing wrong, let's say. But I always try to categorize reviews for like positive and negative ones, so that we can use then that data to address it kind of in our clients' messaging and keep it into consideration. I think it's a really good point, like making that distinction between positive and negative, and also realize how much negative feedback is there in the market around this niche, around these types of products.
Something also I've seen you mention before is that great messaging isn't just about words. What you say isn't always what your customers will actually hear, and something you kind of also mentioned just now, but or actually experience also. So how would you balance copy, user experience, and also psychology to ensure that your message actually sticks?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about those 3 layers that I mentioned. So it's kind of like a pyramid. We have the understand layer, then the experience layer, and at the top the action layer. If you want people to act, you first need to understand them, then you need to understand how they consume your messaging, whatever they're going through, which also kind of integrates with the design. And that's why we pay a lot of attention as well to the UX of the copy, the user experience of the copy, when we do our wireframes. So we don't only write the copy, we place it we lay it out into wireframes that tell you exactly, this is the visual hierarchy, so this is what should be consumed first, this should be consumed second. And because the way that I see it, it's I always say people don't just read words, they need to unpack meaning from those words that you show them. And also, they don't buy a product, they make a buying decision. So each section that we display in our wireframes, we consider it as kind of like a group of micro decisions. So in this section we have, let's say, a headline, a paragraph, and a call to action. They read the headline. Does it grab attention? Okay, that's one decision that's done. That makes them read the paragraph, the following paragraph. Does the following paragraph, is it compelling enough, clear enough, that then makes them want to click the button? Could be a yes, but typically if it's a value proposition at the top, probably they're not going to click. But is the whole block compelling enough to make them want to scroll and read the next section? So, okay, that's what matters. At least we have them complete that single decision in their mind. So it's not only about the primary calls to action that you have on the website, like your main buttons, book a call, book a demo. It's about all the micro decisions and micro steps that they need to take. And to understand those, again, we go back to all those 3 layers that we talked about. It's important to understand the who they are, what they do, and why they act.
Now, there's another path I want to take you on, and I want to talk about AI. so, I mean, it's like, there are good and negative things, I guess, about it, but the reality is that it's getting really, really difficult to talk about marketing without talking about AI. And I know you recently shared thoughts on this, on how to speak to your customers, or like how to speak your customers' language using AI. So how should our listeners try to craft messages that actually resonate with their audience in a, let's say, like consistent manner while using AI.
Yeah, so you had a great word there, which is consistent, because if you try ChatGPT now or any other of those commercial platforms, it's typically hard to get consistent, but also good and human-sounding language, unless you probably get the same jargon fluff that you get from most enterprise companies, because that's what AI has access to, like the whole internet, and so it basically gets the average of all of it. So AI, as I mentioned, one thing that I always try to specify is that I think AI can write the content. It's probably going to be fluffy jargon, but it doesn't have the context. So what I mean is that it has access to all of the data, the whole internet, but it doesn't have access to your refined thinking, to your internal strategy, to your insights. So the first thing that I always do, and I always advise my clients to do when they use AI, is they treat it as an assistant. It's not going to replace you, but it can be an assistant. Only though if you start feeding it with the right information. So, for example, in our case, we always create separate projects and use different tools, but separate projects that all of them have all the context the model needs to start thinking in terms of like a partner, like a strategic partner. Which means start sharing all transcripts from interviews, all the survey data, all the even initial intake surveys that we get from clients. As long as it starts having the whole context, the whole picture on the whole project and what you're trying to achieve, then it can be a useful partner that can help you shortcut the time that you take to think about things. It can give you different perspectives that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. And your writing, that's when you actually, once you get to the full spectrum of the whole project, so you go through all the stages, which is research, strategy. When you get to the writing part, if you share the right context in the right order and following the right process, then that's when AI can actually write good stuff. So in our case, we get to a point where AI can definitely write a first draft, and then we always, at least as of now, always have to jump in and be kind of the editor and supervise the whole thing. So that's important to keep that human in the loop in the process, to just make sure that everything is still correct. Because even now there's this whole thing of agentic workflows. And if you do it right, you can build kind of these workflows that have evaluations so that you can make sure that it has fewer and fewer hallucinations. But even then, I also still like to be the craftsman at the end, jumping in and making sure that, okay, this speaks in an empathic way. As a human, I still think it's important for us to understand when the message empathizes and when it's not working.
100% agree with you there, but like I feel like at the moment we are in this phase where it's quite a funny one, because similarly you have like so many B2B tech companies like struggling because they all sound the same, and at the same time you have an increased, like exponentially increased use of AI from users who don't necessarily feed or like create projects and like train the algorithm for their specific case. And so you have many more companies struggling with their differentiation, and at the same time everyone is starting to exponentially sound the same. So it's quite interesting then that if you actually start to use it in the right way, as you said, like as an assistant and not necessarily as a content creator, then you put yourself in a situation where you can actually differentiate yourself from the competition and actually win that race.
If you imagine, like, there was a lot of competition at any stage of our evolution in the past, like in the 90s or 2000s when the first SaaS products started popping up. It was still kind of, there was a point where there were a lot of it speaking kind of the same, and the good copywriters were able to differentiate. So it's going to be the same, but at a much larger scale, I think, now with AI. If you can use it well, then you can scale it and differentiate from others.
And that takes me actually to my next question, like the evolution, or like, the evolution of the language, or like how to differentiate from the rest of the crowd, in a sense. So I recently listened to this great discussion on YouTube on why we keep inventing new words from the etymology nerd and Alex O'Connor. If you are not familiar with those guys, they're like very interesting brains. Part of the discussion involved how quickly our language or languages are evolving, and even the meaning of words or jargon is evolving with time. So, of course, when thinking about language evolution, things take time. But I still want to hear your thoughts on like how often should companies actually revisit their messaging to stay relevant for their audience, especially considering how fast, for instance, B2B SaaS companies or the B2B SaaS space is evolving.
Yeah, so I typically recommend every 6, maximum 12 months, or once a year at least, try and revisit. Doesn't mean necessarily revisiting the whole messaging strategy. Maybe you will just have just a single product, or one angle of how you speak about a certain feature can be very specific even. And so there's maybe that once or twice a year if possible, but it also depends on if you have recent pivot in your product, or maybe a new competitor pops up and starts disrupting the market with some other feature or different approach to things, or if the whole market shifts and you kind of have to adapt. So those, I think, are the main reasons and kind of the approach that companies should take when it comes to refining or refreshing their messaging.
And then, I'm a big believer also in customer interviews, or for instance, like to pick customers' brain and understand like their side of the story, and also like as you said earlier, like the words, to understand the words they use to describe like the value they get from you. But also firm believer in like, for instance, relying on advertising, for instance, to test new messaging angles, or to experiment with that. But do you have maybe advice for our listeners today for validating your potentially new messaging hypothesis?
There's very few message testing platforms for B2B specifically. So I used to work at a usability testing startup as well. And the usability testing can work very well, not only for product design decisions, product development decisions, but also for understanding messaging first impressions. If you are in B2C, for example, just because there's more broader access to testers that are relevant to what you might offer as if you're in B2C. For B2B, obviously it's harder because the audience that you need to test with, it's probably C-suites or other people at companies, so it's hard to find testers that are in that firmographic, psychographic. So there's one platform that a lot of people know. It's probably, I think it's the only one or one of the fewer ones. It's called Winter, which is a good messaging platform specifically for B2B. The problem though with some of these platforms, especially if you're a small company, they can get quite expensive. So another maybe a bit controversial opinion that I have, just because I've been doing it myself, is to use AI as kind of like your synthetic research partner. So yeah, a lot of people call it synthetic research, synthetic users. There are already platforms that basically do it for you, but again, they're more enterprisey, so not super accessible to smaller teams. So the way that I've been doing it is basically, since I'm already doing all the research, and since I'm a strong believer that you first need to do your real research with real users, even if you have as few users as possible, just the basics, the bare bones, you need to conduct it. Once you have the initial data, then you can use AI to create these synthetic personas just by feeding it all the data in the right way. There's a few approaches if you can prompt it the right way. So then it can basically, since AI has got access to all the internet, super broad scope, with that data you're able to restrict its kind of field of vision, field of thinking, let's say. And it's pretty good, I found, in simulating your typical audience. So I think it's important, even if you don't get obviously to 100% accuracy in your tests or whatever you're doing with AI. If you're a small company, like even just getting 60-70% of the way there, it's already golden that you wouldn't have been able to have gotten otherwise. So I think that could be a good approach, and I'm kind of an advocate for trying it at least and seeing what results it gives you. And it's also a great way to learn how AI works. So I think it's a win-win.
Okay, so but like in practice, like what type of results do you get? Like, or are you relying on AI like to do some math for you to tell you like, I expect that, that many % of your target audience would actually be receptive to this or something? Or like, is AI telling you, yes, this is right, this is wrong? Like, how do you use it in practice?
Yeah, so we obviously try to create as many kind of AI personas as possible that represents different scenarios. But for example, we can have conversations like if we could. It's mostly the qualitative data. Like you can prompt it to give you like scores for whatever, but I typically trust those like with a grain of salt. But the qualitative data you get can be very helpful. So for example, you can ask things about like objections based on a specific messaging piece of copy that you share. You can ask if they like simulate maybe their visit on their website. So you share different pieces of copy and tell it, okay, you stumble on this website. First you see this, then you see that. What are the questions are you having that maybe aren't addressed in this copy here?
Okay.
So those kinds of insights. And yes, another thing that I've done, especially for emails, which can actually be quite helpful, when you want to maybe A/B test 2-3 variants of different emails in an email sequence, you can basically share the whole sequence and the 2 variants with AI and ask it, and with this persona that you created, and ask it, for example, give me scores for how much this email resonates with you compared to the other email. And you can see, okay, this email works best, and it can tell you why also as well. And then it's also up to you, when with your knowledge of the audience and the product and the market, to look at the results that this AI persona gives you, and also critically think, is this accurate based on this persona? Can I trust it, or do I need more data to feed into it because I don't think that this is good enough?
Well, this is giving me a lot of ideas and things to play with. So thank you so much. And I hope that our audience also is having the same feeling. So I have one more question before we move on to the last bit of the show. So you mentioned that earlier you're a drummer. So if bad messaging or a drum solo, what would it sound like, and what would you do to fix it?
Okay, so I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with this, but like a lot of drummers, bands, especially at the beginning when they don't have resources or they don't have access to recording studios, now there's a lot of tools that you can use to program your drums, like basically electronically. It's called MIDI. You can basically add different like points, dots to different parts of the drums to basically compose the whole drums sections. And to me, bad messaging sounds like a digitally composed drums, which basically it's flat. It doesn't have dynamics. It doesn't have emotion, character. And also the thing that bad messaging lacks, which you can be an expert at your product, you can know your audience and all of that, which is great. It's already better than what a lot of companies are doing. But also what makes messaging strong, I think it's a strong point of view, your narrative. Why are you doing what you're doing? What's that insight that only you have that makes it possible for you to offer that product in that way? So once you are able to hook people with your strong differentiated point of view, that's when your messaging also differentiates from the rest. And that's what synthetic digital drums don't do when you hear them in a song.
Sounds a lot like the same issue we're facing with AI, I guess. But I totally get your point. But Chris, thank you so much. Now, this is that one question I asked to all of my guests on the show to share some thoughts with our audience. What advice have you received that made you a better professional or simply better at your job?
So I always have this quote from late Kobe Bryant. I'm also a basketball fan. Kobe is one of my virtual mentors, my legends. And he said, when he was asked what was going on in his head when he missed like 5 3-pointers in a row when he was a rookie. And one thing that he said was that like struck me was, you have to get over yourself. And that to me, he said, get over yourself, it's not about you. And that to me speaks to the fact that you kind of have to stop placing that much importance on yourself. What's more important is that you become better to serve other people better, right? So in this case, Kobe Bryant said, instead of like wondering, like beating myself up with all the stuff and feeling embarrassed, like he stop thinking about himself and start thinking about, why did I miss those shots? What was the thing that I can do better next time to fix my technique? So I think that's super important. And I think I always kind of still feel kind of like an imposter. But if you think about it, all of us are kind of imposters trying to do our best.
No, but and that's a good thing. Like, if you don't have that imposter syndrome, then you're just going into new adventures like both hands in your pockets, and that's probably not a good sign.
Yeah.
So getting that imposter syndrome also maybe forces you to get out of your comfort zone and exactly work harder and get those results from those experiments, from those potential failures as well.
And also because of the people that don't really have that imposter syndrome typically are those scammy people that you see in ads that promise you, hey, get 10 clients for free or you're not paying. Those are the guys that typically don't suffer from it.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, people should be suspicious of people who claim not having that imposter syndrome. Well, that's perfect way, I guess, to end that episode. Chris, thank you so much for joining. I learned a lot today, and I'm pretty sure our audience did as well.
Thank you so much, Clem. It's been awesome.
And this concludes today's episode. I hope you learned a thing or two, and if you did, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. This podcast is brought to you by marketing agency Advanced B2B. So if you're looking for a partner to assist you with strategic marketing and anything HubSpot, visit advancedb2b.com. And if you're still around to hear this, thank you for listening and take care.